Hello, hello. It's nice to finally get to talk to you, Shell.
Indeed, I'm glad to be on the show.
Thank you. And thank you so much for introducing me to Mike. That was such a wonderful time I had yesterday getting to talk to him about writing the Epoch Ascension universe.
I I gotta say I'm probably his biggest fan, so I don't mind talking about him.
It seems he's the second chance I've had to talk to a writer, and they seem to be very wordy people so far. So I don't know if that has to do with like the craft itself or just a general personality trait, but I really enjoy it.
Well, I have to warn you because I'm a writer and an artist, so you get the wordiness with me a little too.
Perfect. I've loved every one of these conversations so far. So jumping right into it, then, you have a very comics kind of artistic style. I've checked out a lot of your different postings on both DeviantArt and Twitter and the Ascension Epoch. I bought Black or Darker Tides. So,
Dismal
is
Tide.
there any Dismal Tides? My apologies.
All right.
Um, is there any specific inspirations for that? Was there anything that kind of drew you into, getting your hand in that style?
Um, it's entirely X-Men comics. When the Fox superhero hour was on with Batman and X-Men in 1993, I was right there, and I got into comics and I never looked back. I uh, I especially like John Byrne and black and white artwork, and I think that shows a little bit. I draw faces
Yeah.
differently than he does, but
You have a really, really good black and white style, though. It's tremendous. I love checking out the works that you put out there.
thank you very much.
And that's I mean, I'm more of a fan of like neon colors and just bright and popping and out there. That's the kind of stuff that grabs my attention usually. But your work is the type where once I started looking at it, I wanted to check out more of it because that like the mermaid one, for example, is the first one I saw. And all I could think was, wow, she did all that with just blacks and whites. That's crazy. I want to see what else there is going on here. And then you just do so much in like the muscular forms, and it's just got that comics vibe to it, and I love it so much.
And one of these days we'll actually put out a comic, but that's off in the future.
Ah,
That's actually one of the uh, we have a lot of stories to tell, so we ended up doing illustrated novels with like an illustration or two per chapter. Because it's like, when you have a lot of stories to tell, telling them in comic form is ridiculously time consuming. So we're trying to get
no doubt
that.
at all.
And I'm a English major, and I was a technical writer and a journalist and stuff like that. So the writing and art thing has always been kind of a struggle finding a balance for me.
So is that something that you two work? I kind of got the sense that Mike does the writing and you do the illustrations, but it sounds like you have your hand in both fields. So is that something that you guys work together closely on, or is it your own separate worlds?
No, no, very much. It Okay, so Mike's strength. I mean, Mike's a really good writer. Don't get me wrong, and the um, old-fashioned, the Victorian era, the uh, population of loss tries to mimic uh, with modern improvements the older works of like Burroughs and Wells and things like that. The writing's a little more flowery and a little more wordy, and it's a interesting take for action stories. And that's all Mike can write in a variety of styles, and it's quite impressive. um, but the more modern stories are very much collaboration between the two of us. um, you read Dismal Tide, so a good example of that, I'll say Mike is a world builder. Like that's what he's really good at, getting the details, figuring out the alternate history, how history would have changed if Martians invaded and stuff like that. Um, and then I'm very character oriented. I can come up with and flesh out characters very well. But my weakness is setting. So Mike does a lot of the setting, and then we do the characters together. But and Albedo and Ping from Dismal Tide are really good examples. Sometimes Mike comes up with characters and he's not sure how they're going to be or act fully. So, I had a big hand in developing Albedo and Ping, and he'll write the chapter, like the chapter where they met Slam, which is a superhero team. The East End Irregulars meet Slam in the Dismal Tide. He'll write the whole chapter, and I'll go back in and I'll tweak some of the conversations here and there to be like, well, Albedo would be more like this. And we end up doing quite a few chapters like that.
I love it so much that you guys are husband and wife and have these creative strong points that you can bounce off of each other. What an amazing couple you guys are. That's so cool.
So now you're making me blush, but thank you.
Oh, it's just so nice to see such a positive relationship, and I really appreciate it. You guys are wonderful, and I can't wait to see what else you put out there, because I'll definitely be watching from here on.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that that's it. It brings a grand new element to writing too, because Mike and I both would write things separately before we met, and then we started writing together. But when you're writing alone, like you know how everything's going to go. You're the god of your own little universe, and everything goes according to your plans in your head. But it's really interesting writing with Mike, because later we have stuff written for like future books and stuff like that. In later books with the East End Irregulars, Torrent and Corona are primarily Mike's characters, and then there's two other characters that come in called Threads and Bubbles, and they're primarily my characters. And it's interesting because we'll write chapter by chapter, and we don't know where the story's going, because we don't know how each other's character is going to react to things, and it makes it very interesting.
Yeah, that's super cool. So in the beginning when you two were writing separately, what was it that drew you together creatively? Can you think of any certain project in particular that the two of you were like, well, I can help you off of this, and then that started your collaborative process?
Mike touched on this, but in his interview yesterday,
yeah, he was talking about the not role playing, but
right, yeah, it was
the role playing group.
Right, it was a role-playing board called Less Than Gods, and Mike had created this elaborate universe out of all sorts of characters: Marvel, DC, I think like the Prisoner and stuff like that. GI Joe, Godzilla, Scooby-Doo, and
a real who's who.
Right. And actually Torrent originated in there. Torrent and the Promethean were both original characters that were in there. And then
so some of the character development for this goes way back.
Oh, further back than I think let's see. I came up with Bubbles and Threads, although every character's changed dramatically. But I think I came up with Bubbles and Threads when I was maybe 11 or 12, and Mike originally had an idea for Torrent when he was like 10. So
wow.
We've been holding on to these characters a long time. But where was I going with this? The Less Than Gods. So Mike and I met on Match.com, and shortly after we met, Mike told me about this RPG board, and I hopped on. So from right away, we were writing together, but we were just writing with a large group of people. And one of them was Mike's best friend, Russ. And Russ collaborates a bit with us in the Ascension Epoch now too. As a matter of fact, I think well, it'll be in a future Martian War Chronicles book, but a character that Russ came up with will eventually appear in that too. But yeah, so
Wow, what a success story for Match. Killed it with this grouping. I love it so much.
Yeah, I know, that's just, it's what we do. So
Good for you. I'm sorry, I'm just so like stuck on that. It's such a wonderful story. Or reality rather. It's not a story, but so does the do you take any inspirations from your relationship in particular for kind of how any of the romance aspects work or anything like that? Like everybody gets their inspirations from their daily life and their experiences. So
the really funny thing is it's probably going to be 2 weeks until it comes out. I actually have a video on my YouTube channel that's going to be coming out about this, and it's going to be called Splitting Your Personality to Populate a Universe. Because there's no characters in the Ascension Epoch that are, definitively us. I find that, well, one, if you put a character based on yourself in your own book, I mean, you can do that. That's perfectly fine, and you'll know that character really well. But I think there's a temptation then to make that character Mary Sue. And also, you'll probably be offended if people don't like that character because, like, you're putting you out there. So I always try to just take a couple things from myself and assign it to characters, and then like let that character go through situations and become like their own character. So like there's little bits and pieces of us sort of all over the place, but and I think the funny thing is, people might look at, say, the East End Irregulars and be like, oh, well, if I know that, some of the characters are Mike's characters and some of the characters are Shell's characters, you'd think like, oh, well, Mike's character is Torrent and Shell's character is Corona. But that's not actually the case. Corona is Mike's character. And I think parts of our marriage, like inform their relationship. Like there's interactions between Torrent and Corona, and I could say like, oh yeah, this reminds me of us, and this is like, Mike putting bits of me in Corona. But I can't say there's any particular character or couple that's like us dead on. No.
but you do take certain aspects of your experience and kind of split it out among the universe. So yeah, I mean, the inspiration is there for sure. And on the topic of the video, when it does come out, you should give me the link for that so that we can put it in the description box. That way anybody who's listening to this later on can go and check that out as well.
All right, I can do that.
So let's talk a bit about kind of how you guys sell your product, because you've clearly spent a long time, developing it and world building and character developing. And how do you market it? Where is it that you prefer to go to try and get the word out there?
Wow, that's a very good question. I think it's funny because it's, Mike and I do sell books, and we certainly sell more books than some other indie authors we know. There are some other indie authors we know who are like way more successful than us. So Mike and I are kind of like in the middling area of things. I forget, is it Larry Correa put out a funny list of, how there's like B-list actors?
Yeah.
He made a A-list to Z-list of authors, and Mike and I were going through it. And I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, hey, we're in KL, so we're right in the center.
Not a bad place to be, I guess.
No, it's not, because like, everyone works their way up. And so we go to cons and we sell pretty well at cons. Mike talked a lot about that, so I'm gonna try not to repeat a lot of what he said.
Yeah, he
Um,
did speak a good bit about it.
and like we do good at like horror cons and there's like some science fiction lit cons and stuff like that. But and it's funny because our books aren't very scary, but I think I think some people are glad at horror conventions to find something that's like not too jarring. Like,
And
uh,
plus, I mean, if you're into horror, you're kind of falling into that same grouping of people who are into sci-fi fantasy. I mean, it's one of those kind of fringe interests, which
right.
aren't really so fringe anymore. It's really become mainstream, but you would find yourself in that grouping.
Well, sometimes we go to like we did one horror convention and we were right across from someone who had like blood and guts and zombie gore all over the cover of his book and another place that did vampire fangs but also sold like really really gory uh stuffed animals and just
Nice.
like if you're the sort of person that's like I'm not into that like right now today and you look across the aisle it's like well our stuff is still a little creepy and still a little scary and has those horror elements but it's not like super gore so we actually get good sales from that uh, or it's like our stuff is stuff you could buy your teenager if you don't want them watching people rip each other apart or something. um oh but anyway so we do well at conventions. Every once in a while we'll sort of find a group of authors that we can say hey let's all run a sale at the same time and you
Ouch,
know
sorry.
uh, that's
I
okay.
choked on my own breath.
Take a second to breathe.
No, no, I'm so sorry.
Okay. Um, but anyway, so every once in a while we'll find a couple authors and we'll get together and we'll say, well, let's all run a sale and promote it on each other's mailing lists and and the social media stuff. But really, what we're what we're better at now and more so learning is about uh, sort of like the slow journey to build social media and an audience.
Oh man, it is a slow journey.
And I think a big mistake that a lot of people after they first publish make is they look toward uh, other authors. Like when you're first doing it, you get a lot of people that are like, "Oh, I'll read your book and leave a review if you read my book and leave a review." And first off, Amazon doesn't like when you do that. Amazon will actually go through and remove if it looks like authors are leaving like a lot of reviews for other indie authors or you leave reviews for each other. Sometimes Amazon will go pull those off. Um, but the problem with that is like and it's really hard to do because a lot of groups on say social media you'll go and it's like you know the sci-fi reading group and it's populated entirely by authors who are just saying like hey here's my book, hey here's my book, and only the author is interested in that. You sort of have to do sideways marketing and you have to be looking at readers not writers because every writer reads but every writer is also consumed in doing their own work. So they can't be a big fan of so many things. And, after a while of trading books at conventions, you end up with a pile of 50 books and it's like, I can't read all these right now. Um, so to get consumers of media interested, you really have to sort of market sideways. You have to, instead of saying like, here's my book, you should read it, say something like, uh, here's a cool video on how I do part of my craft. And if you like doing this sort of thing, or you're interested in this sort of thing, by the way, I'm also an artist or writer. Like I was saying with the video on splitting up your personality, people are interested in that sort of thing, and more people are interested in that than are, interested in learning about the Ascension Epoch, because the learning how to split up your personality to write a story is something that a lot of people are interested in doing, and hardly anyone knows who the Ascension Epoch is. So that's the way it works. So
But
you
by
kind of,
showing your understanding of that, you're kind of leading them to your own work because they see that you have a better understanding of the concept of building a universe than they do. So they might want to check you out, especially if they're like an up and coming writer.
right, exactly. And even things like, just talking about what you like. It's like, oh, well, I like X-Men. Well, someone that likes X-Men may be like, well, I like X-Men. Maybe I would like what this person writes. You need to try to make connections with people, and that's a big part. You have to put the time in to try to make connections and find common ground with people who could be your readers. And it's hard to do that when you're first trying to market, because all you're thinking about is, I just want people to know I have this product.
Yeah, I find that in my own work, that's a difficult thing to work with. I want people to come and listen to the podcast and potentially, purchase or commission work from the artists involved in it. But I have to do other things in order to get their interest in the podcast. I have to be on Twitter and I have to, have a presence and try and
Mhm.
draw people into it with my personality. And that's not something I'm really interested in doing. So I find it really difficult. And it kind of takes the energy out of me as far as just doing it because it's just not something I'm into. I'd rather have these conversations. I love these one-on-ones because I get an opinion and an insight on what it is you do, and I love creativity. So every time I do these, I'm genuinely interested. I so much just want to know what your insight is on it. As somebody who creates comic books, my thought is, have you ever considered trying to get a hold of and network with one of those YouTubers who do like lore videos or story explanations for comic books? I know you're not exactly a comic product at the moment, but it is much. It's superheroes, it's superpowers, it's alternate reality. It's the kind of thing that comics people would be interested in, and maybe that would be a type of sideways marketing that you could use.
We're actually going to start an in-universe lore channel.
Yes,
That's
perfect.
straight up Ascension Epoch. But we don't have any videos on it right now. I think Mike mentioned it. We're actually, we have the art done for the first video. We just have to put it together. But uh, our first priority right now is to get out the next Martian War Chronicles book, Days of Wrath, and I have my Bexham's Bazaar work that I do. Bexham's Bazaar is a tabletop RPG magazine, and my deadline for that is always on the 20th. So I'm pushing the deadline for that, and then immediately after that, I'm switching back to working on the Days of Wrath illustrations, and we're that's the priority, because you always have to set priorities. You're always going to want to do a million different things, and you won't do anything if you don't like stop and say, well, this thing is the most important thing.
There's only
So
so many hours in a day.
yes, and especially because we're chasing a toddler around too, and Mike has a day job. So
So, are you working full time as an artist? And are, I didn't look at the actual posting for the magazine, but was that a illustration or a writing piece?
that it I'm saying we don't really do comics, but there's two things, actually three. There's two things I do for Bexham's Bazaar, sometimes three. Sometimes I write. The one sometimes thing is, sometimes I write a 2-page article on one of our characters, giving stats for putting them into your own RPG as a PC or NPC. Um, the two things I always do for that magazine. One of them is just a standalone. Standalone, we'll call it genre illustration. It could be fantasy, it could be sci-fi, so long as it's related to popular RPG genres. Like last month was like a steampunk sort of Call of Cthulhu sort of type thing with the Promethean and in a Frankenstein-esque drawing. That mermaid illustration is actually from Bexham's Bazaar. So I always do one black and white standalone illustration for them every month. And then the other thing I do is with the Ascension Epoch, we do the Creative Commons thing where people can use our characters so long as they also release it as share alike and they attribute us. And one of the things that we expect will happen with that one day is that people will, how to put it? It seems like every big thing like, X-Men and the DC superheroines and stuff like that has ended up as like a high school drama or something at some point. So the Bexham's Bazaar work is medieval fantasized, so it's completely non-canon. It's completely like genre bending. Medieval fantasy versions of our characters in a sort of completely different universe, interacting with characters that they wouldn't normally interact with, like the characters from Imps, can interact with the Challenger Foundation characters, and even at some point they'll probably interact with Signalman, who's in the regular Ascension Epoch has been dead for decades by the time the modern day comes around. There's a comic in Bexham's Bazaar. It's a half page and it runs once a month, and it tells an ongoing story, but it's also sort of a witty little gag per strip or action scene per strip, like Nodwick from the old Dungeon or Dragon magazine.
How did you get into working with them? This seems like something that's probably been going on for a while and it's a regular thing, so clearly you're a part of it. So what was your introduction to getting into the magazine?
This is the really, really funny part about finding out, because Bexham's Bazaar is great. They don't tell me. It's beautiful because a lot of times you end up doing work and it's work for hire, and whoever wants it done tells you exactly what they want, and you have to do it, and then oftentimes they own the rights. And Bexham's Bazaar magazine is great. It's run by DM Jim and the tabletop engineer. And he just says, so long as you keep it like an interesting, adventurous something that fits within like this tabletop genre, you can do whatever you want and you keep the rights, which is beautiful. But I think a lot of artists, they go looking for jobs from other people, and part of looking for things, part of getting to do what you want, I think, is also suggesting things to people, because DM Jim didn't want, I don't say didn't want, DM Jim didn't know he wanted a comic for Bexham's Bazaar. He created Bexham's Bazaar. He wanted it to have that Dungeon and Dragon feel. I didn't know him before I contacted him about getting in the magazine. I only watched his YouTube channel, which is about crafting for tabletop games and terrain and stuff like that.
If he's in the Warhammer 40k scene, then I'm probably familiar.
There you go, and he is.
I've fallen down those rabbit holes many times.
But he, he put out this magazine, and he said he was looking for submissions on articles and artwork and stuff like that. And the first thing I did was I contacted him, because you always want to test the waters when you're doing anything creative with anyone. Like, even if they're just buying it to put in a magazine, you always want to see, like, how much work is this going to be for me to do? How much am I going to get paid? Is this person friendly, et cetera, et cetera. So I started off saying, like, if you want artwork, I'll do this standalone illustration, and let's talk about how much money we could get for it and stuff like that. And we came to a good agreement, and I did the illustrations. And then I think it was after 2 months, DM Jim seemed like a really friendly, receptive guy. And I pitched the comic. I said, hey, you're obviously trying to be a bit like Dragon Magazine here. And Dragon Magazine had Nodwick and The Adventures of Phil and Dixie. And you should have something like that. And I can do it. And here's what I'd charge. And he said, yeah, because a lot of times people don't know what they want. And you always have to be out there saying, like, this is what I could do, or do you want this? Or, and if you're trying to say, just be like a commercial success, like Mike supports the family. Mike is a software developer. I'm not putting food on the table, but if I had to, you always have to be saying, if you go into a pizza shop with no logo, you had to be saying to people, like, I'm an artist. If you ever need a logo, I'm an artist. And you had to get into shameless self-promotion to
Market
really.
yourself like pancakes.
Right, exactly. And
I
a
gotta
lot
tell
of.
Literate Gamer I made that callback. Sorry.
No, I saw that interview, or heard that interview. I really liked that, and it's true. And it's hard. It's hard because a lot of artists and a lot of creative people are introverts, but you really have to get into shameless self-promotion.
I've noticed, especially with the introvert thing, man, it is. I can't express how many times I've been told, no, sorry, I don't want to be involved in the podcast. I'm uncomfortable with conversations that involve my voice. I've
Mhm.
heard that so many times now from artists. And I really hope that I can get to a point to where people are actually noticing my stuff so that they can feel a little bit more comfortable coming on here, because there seems to be like this stigma of, uh, when you talk to somebody, potentially they could just be really rude to you. And I've got nothing like that going on. I'm extremely positive with everybody. So I'm trying to put that vibe out there, and hopefully we'll break some of them out of their shells and get them out to the public, because that's something a lot of artists need, is just a place to have a voice and be heard,
It
especially
re
since a lot of them are antisocial.
Yeah, it really is, and it's really, uh it's a shame because you're the only person that cares. Like, it's not that you're the only person that cares about your work, because, I mean, you could be doing, I don't know, like, you could be Stanley and Jack Kirby doing the Fantastic Four. Like, you could be that good. Um and you could have the next thing that is huge and epic, and it's the highest quality thing in the world, but until other people learn about it, you're the only person that knows about it. And if you're not talking about it, and you're not, you know talking to people and saying, hey, this thing exists, and like I said, sometimes you have to do it sideways, um but no one else is going to do that. Like, if you show your comic to your mom and your mom's like, hey, this is great, unless your mom goes and tells other people that are, like, around your age range and into the genres that are correct for it. If your mom's friends are all part of the romance reading club or the mystery reading club at the local library, that's not going to help you. So you have to be the person trying to market and talk, and you have to get over that introversion, even if it's only temporarily, and even if it's you have to go put your head down after you do all that extroversion.
You got to be out there. You got to tell people about the stuff that you're working on in order for them to take notice. And hopefully I can help with that. And hopefully
I,
other people will steal this idea for real. That's what I want to see. I want to see somebody copy what I'm doing and do it better than me, because that means that it's a concept that is functional and available. And that's what I want more than anything. I just want to level up the artist community by getting them out there and, helping them push their stuff forward.
I think that's another thing that, like, Hmm. Uh, I've actually I've actually grown the popularity of my artwork and my channels just by reaching out and trying to be helpful sometimes. You know, I hang out in a couple discords that are related to art. I, talk to and give
We
other
might be
people.
in a few together.
Yeah, we might. Um, I talk to other artists and stuff, and like I'll give advice to like well, any artist at any level, but even artists that are on the same level or better than me. Like a lot of times you might be better than them at one aspect and you can still give advice. But if you're friendly and you talk to people, um, or I'll hang out on the DeviantArt forums and try to give advice every now and again. Am I still connected? Can you
Yes,
hear
you
me?
are. I still hear you.
Okay, good. Um, if you can't talk about yourself, if you find it really difficult to just jump into a conversation and say, hey, I have this book, just try to be helpful, because sometimes people need help with things that are entirely objective, and you can say like, I have the knowledge to help you with this, and sometimes answering a question and being very matter of fact is a lot easier than say marketing yourself, and that's a big thing people can do too.
Yeah, you definitely find. I mean, I through positivity. If you're putting those good vibes out there and helping people, and really trying to be of assistance rather than trying to just gain popularity for yourself and take from the community, then for sure you're going to definitely get more of a positive reception. And it might take longer overall because you're not focusing solely on promoting yourself, but you're going to build a reputation and a good word about yourself. And that, in the end, is going to be probably better than getting a couple of eyes on you really quick and then having them gone because they don't know or care about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, in that, have you and Mike considered building up? Well, I don't know if you have it. Do you guys have a role playing group currently for the Ascension Epoch?
We don't. You know, uh, Role playing took a lot of time, and at
No
this
doubt at
point,
all. Been there.
right, and you know, pa part of it is that, you know, Mike and I have to work on the canon books. We just have to, 'cause, we're the only people making Ascension Epoch stuff. But, we try to encourage things like, there's character bios, for the old Marvel Superheroes RPG, the Face Rip, um, with stats and everything on our website, ascensionepoch.com. One word, no spaces. Uh, so like if
It'll be in the
people,
description.
right. So like we encourage people to play with and use our characters and stuff like that, and and to make their own versions of our universe and everything. So it's not exactly bringing the board back, but we're trying to make it accessible to people.
Well, it seems like the two of you have a real interest, especially Mike. I mean, he's into the whole building terrain and crafting for tabletop gaming. So, have you guys considered putting together like an official code rulebook and marketing the Ascension Epoch as an actual game instead of having people use other rule sets and kind of sideline your characters in? You could have specifically a game for this project.
What we're trying to do is actually, how to put it, there actually is an unpublished Ascension Epoch rule book with like rules built from scratch and stuff like that. But the feedback we've gotten from a lot of people in the RPG community is that essentially no matter what we do, people are going to put their own spin on the rules anyway. So what
Well,
we've
of
been
course
in,
they are. They're really
right,
just guideline books.
exactly. So we have a couple things in the work that'll be coming out. One is um, a series called Invisible Cities, where we let's see, it's based in the East End, well, the Ascension Epoch, obviously, but particularly off the East End Irregulars, where it describes uh, parts of Pittsburgh, interesting things that could be in Pittsburgh, um, encounters and NPCs, and like a whole little thing for you to do a campaign, and you could just put that in whatever you want to do. We give the phase rip uh, stats for the Ascension Epoch characters and things like that, just because we think the old Marvel Superheroes RPG is one of the best ways to play superhero games. But, you know, uh, looking at any stats helps you gauge how you would make those stats for your own thing. Um, for whatever system you're going in. So we're kind of making books that will almost like modules, where it'll help you uh, incorporate large chunks of the Ascension Epoch, both in setting and characters, and and bring them into your own game. So it's a happy medium, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just wondering on like a merchandising level and having something that people can buy to have the rule book, because as somebody who plays Dungeons and Dragons online, I usually play through Discord, so you meet a lot of different people in that and a lot of in and outers. There's not really a set group usually. So
Hmm.
we see a lot of people who come in and they've downloaded, say, a whole compendium, and they have every single book for the Dungeons and Dragons rule sets and all the monster manuals, and they didn't pay a penny for it. But
Hmm.
then you also have the players who specifically go out and buy these things because they want that hard copy. They want the I would say almost imaginary prestige of I went out and I purchased this because I wanted to have it in my collection. So
Uh,
that's kind of where I was going with the idea of a rule book specifically for that. Because gamers are all like that. I mean, once we
oh
get
yeah,
into it, I mean, as
I
a
know.
whole, it's like, oh, I'm obsessed. I have to buy these things.
No, Mike and I do the whenever we go to a faraway location, like 2 states away. That's far away for us. Um, but you know, we always check out where the comic or the game stores are, and we go digging, especially through the bargain bins, because you never know what you're going to find in there. Sometimes it's
Oh yeah,
great,
there's
great
always
stuff.
hidden treasures.
Exactly. So yeah, we have probably 3 or 4 shelves of our bookshelf downstairs filled with just game books.
Yeah, so I mean, you're an example of exactly that kind of audience. So it seems like it would be a smart idea to really kind of put those out there. I'm not pushing or
Right.
anything. I'm just genuinely curious because you guys have such a wonderfully well developed creation with so many different attributes to it that it could lend to playing. If you did the firefighter one, that would be a whole different game than if you were doing the EastEnders. I mean, you have so many different options here in the world that you've created, so it would be such a wonderful thing to just unleash those on player characters and let them see how they would react to it.
We the this would be far, far off down the road. Like we only have a couple little things written for it, but like there's so many different genres in the Ascension Epoch that we actually have a couple pages written of like. Have you ever heard of the show Dark Shadows?
Uh, was that the spoofy vampire one?
Uh that there was a horrible Johnny Depp movie a couple years ago that was like a comedy essentially, but the original was a soap opera that completely took itself seriously. It was like ridiculous, over the top acting, and everything was overwrought the way soap operas were, but it was really, really glorious. Um, and Mike and I both love it. And you know, in a couple of our notebooks are some ideas for like a you know gothic horror RPG setting with the Ascension Epoch characters and examples and stuff like that. That would be years and years down the road until we finish something like that, because your prioritizing everything. But yeah, like right now, Mike's working the shorter term plan. Mike's working on a steampunk Wild West one set in the Martian War Chronicles around the year 1900, and that module would be coming out probably next year sometime. And the uh, Invisible Cities Pittsburgh one will be probably coming out next year too, and that's just waiting on some art. So those are the short-term plans as far as RPGs go.
That's really cool. I love that you guys have so many ideas in the works, and you're really developing it as a brand. I hate that word brand because it doesn't sound
It's a,
right anymore, especially with some of the awful choices that the bigger companies make.
it sounds impersonal.
But it very much is. I mean, the Ascension Epoch is the brand, and then you have the intellectual properties for each one. So
Right.
that's what it is. Now, with Mike being a software engineer, have you guys considered putting out any kind of like app or anything like that? Because you could, for instance, there's some comic book apps where you can rent the use of a comic to read it for a certain amount of time, and then it disappears from your library. You guys could be doing that kind of thing with your own work.
Um, I'm going to say no and no and no for two reasons. Number one, Mike is a software developer. Mike is a very good software developer. But it's strictly what he does to make a living. He doesn't, he's not the sort of guy that comes home and is like, oh, I want to code when I come home. So for right now, so long as Mike is working full time as a software developer, there won't be anything like that created by Mike. And I don't blame him because, you put in your 8 hours or however many hours a day and you deserve your break.
Get
And the
away
other
from it, refresh the eyes for sure.
and the other reason is I mean, I don't know. The I don't know how to say it. Our books are even if you buy them from Amazon, our books are DRM free. Like uh, we're not against copying our stuff. We're not against sharing our stuff or loaning our stuff to other people. We're I don't put like print resolution artwork on the internet, but like even when I share artwork on the internet, it's usually larger than some artists would share it. We're very oriented towards our you buy our stuff and you own our stuff, and you can have it and reshare it. Mike and I don't particularly like uh, you know the I won't say the concept of rentals, but uh, I feel like I don't know exactly how to say it, but I think I got my point across there.
Yeah, that's just not the avenue that you're looking to go into with the philosophy that you guys hold about your creations.
Yes.
That makes sense. Well, I think at this point we've covered quite a bit. And at the end of these, I like to give the artist a chance to speak to, a younger person, somebody who's just starting out and looking to get into art. What's something that you would tell them to help them find their way forward and develop their talent?
Um, you're good enough right now. I think that holds everyone back. Every artist, every writer that I've met, they sit on something and they hold something and they polish it and they polish it and they polish it and they polish it and they never release it. But the fact is, you need to get things out now. It's never going to be perfect. Um, for my own part, I didn't really put anything out there except like fan fiction when I was younger and stuff like that. But I didn't put my own work and my own characters and stuff like that out there until I met Mike. And that's dumb because you want people to know you now. Even if you put out something that people might think is subpar today, that's still someone who knows your name today. And if you don't create your thing that's, wonderful and gold for 5 or 10 years, having your name out there today is going to make marketing that thing 5 or 10 years from now all that easier because people know who you are. So do it today. You're good enough today. I don't care if you draw stick figures, put it out there, because you need to.
That's a wonderful bit of advice. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining. Like I was telling Mike, I know that right now this platform is small. There's not a lot of eyes on it, but I'm working on building it, and I appreciate every time an artist comes on here and gives me a chance to work on that and move forward. So thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
And thanks for having me on. You too.